Hello and welcome. Today I'd like to talk about a game I'm willing to bet you haven't heard of. It's a game called Marrow. It's an indie Metroidvania game on Steam, and as you can see, it hasn't had the most sterling career. It came out in 2016, and at the time of making this video, it's 63% positive with only 22 reviews. There are 0 people playing it right now, and it boasts an all-time peak of 3 concurrent players. So, is it a good game? Well, it's complicated. I was on the fence about making this video, but if I don't talk about it, who will? I feel like I had a divine visitation, like it's my duty to talk about this game or something bad will happen. Now, Marrow does bill itself as a horror game, so if you don't have your mom's permission, don't close the video because I need the engagement, but maybe just close your eyes or something. Anyway, the game starts with this text: "Awaken in the nightmare." Which feels a little on the nose, but I'm not going to nitpick pretty much the only line in the entire game. So, you wake up, or awaken, to a house filled with empty beds, but no one else around. You head downstairs, only to find it just as deserted, and a strange hole in the ground. Standing before it, you can see these images flash, and might notice that they appear suspiciously similar to the figures on the start menu. With nothing else to do, you head into the basement and find a tunnel which you can crawl through. This is the start of the game. Your name is Daniel, though I had to beat the game to figure that one out, and all of your friends have suddenly vanished in the middle of the night. Now, the game doesn't tell you any of this, you're just expected to suss it out for yourself. The first thing you'll notice about this game is that it's extremely dark, and I don't mean that just in tone. I recommend playing this game in a dark room, not necessarily because of the atmosphere, but because it's easier to see the screen. Basically, all you're doing here is getting used to the controls. The platforming is simple and responsive, it doesn't have any weird delays, you have full strafe control mid-air, and the gravity feels appropriate. Also, these weird things keep appearing for one frame. Down here is where you encounter your first enemy. This green thing with no arms, and if you get close, it screams at you. There's no way of attacking it, so we gotta go around. We go down here, take some fall damage, and come to an impassable wall. Fortunately, there's a switch right below it. It also subtly shows that those glowing flies are there to help you. Going through the wall, we come to a strange statue, which we soon realize is a save point. And it does that every time you save. Then there's some platforming over enemies that are barely visible, and then that leads to this. Yes, it's a weapon. There is combat in this game. But giving you a clumsy weapon is pretty standard in horror games. It generally encourages running away from monsters instead of fighting them. In the next area, there's some wall crawlers straight out of Metroid. These platforms are half transparent, but if we go down here and hit a switch, a timer activates. Then we can climb up and get the first health upgrade, except it's not called health, it's called grit, and it's blue instead of red. This is only the beginning. The combat is straightforward, if a little janky. You just click and you attack, that's it. Now I'd like to introduce the main combat strategy in this game. It's something I'd like to call ABJ, always be jumping. Standing on the ground locks you into an attack animation, but if you're airborne you can strafe, and when you touch the ground it cancels your attack animation so you can attack again sooner. Anyway, down here is an extremely dark room. Can't see anything. So we don't go there, we go this way. There's this statue that holds an amulet. We grab it, and as you can see, it makes the area much brighter. Going back, it's still dark as hell, but we can see more. And that's basically all the mechanics. Now the question becomes, why is it rated so poorly? It's not the best looking game, sure, but it's got a distinct style that was enough to get me to buy it in the first place, and the controls aren't terrible, at least by my standards. I've seen worse games on Steam, so why? Well, the mystery starts to unravel once you leave this tutorial area. The game opens up, more paths appear, and then you realize you have no map. Okay, you can live with that, but then you take some damage and start wondering where your health is. And there it is, but now it's gone. I had to press F to see it, but if I press it again, nothing happens. Guess what? That was the only time I'm allowed to look at my health. Not until I get to another save room, at least. That's right, checking your health is a limited resource. Also, there's no start menu and there's not even a way to pause. Plus, the only way to heal is to save. Bizarre as these design choices are, I don't think they're deal breakers, but the mystery is starting to unravel. Anyway, we go up here and we find this. This is one of the 13 orphans, or at least their, soul, I guess. They're hidden all throughout the game, but fortunately there's a sound cue to tell you when one's nearby. And any game wanting to be like Metroid needs the obscure hidden power-ups. So I get that and die soon after. I'm back at the save point, and that means I need to run all the way back. But that thing I just picked up, well, I need to go get it again. Unlike most modern games, anything you pick up is lost unless you save after grabbing it. It was pretty standard in older games, but these days I'd say the practice has mostly fallen out of favor. By the way, that red number is my magic. Yep, they're reversed. And it's called Clarity instead. Now we enter the next area, called Windheim. Or not, because I ran into an enemy that's practically invisible. So I'm back here again. And that means, you guessed it, I need to get the collectibles again. Remember when I said that horror games generally make combat clumsy in order to discourage fighting? Well, in Marrow it is absolutely necessary. The combat is a core mechanic, so you better practice your ABJ. According to the Steam store page, this whole game takes place inside of a mountain. Anyway, at the bottom we come to this pool of not blood, but the titular substance Marrow. And then there's this thing, which warps us here. It's this game's form of quick travel, and that means backtracking. All of this game's design choices are not unintentional. The lack of a map could possibly be dismissed as laziness, but the fact that checking your health was made a limited resource displays a willful deviation from gaming convention. The original Metroid and Metroid 2 had no map, but it was probably due to hardware limitations, considering a mapping system was added in Super Metroid. Now, the 2014 game Subnautica doesn't have a map, and neither do the Dark Souls games, so there is a precedent in favor of missing or limited maps. The goal is to make the player feel lost, confused, to force them to engage with the world on a deeper level, but confusion can quickly turn to irritation, and even when handled well, there will always be players lost to this approach. And clearly Marrow lost a lot of people. But that alone I don't think is enough. And then this happens. You're trapped, so you try to attack it, but you just take damage. Whatever this thing is, it clearly doesn't like you very much. And then these appear. You might remember seeing them briefly at the beginning. Whoever they are, they're here to help. Undeterred, we continue on. In spite of Marrow's low play count and ratings, I don't think the lack of a map was the cause. It's not impossible to find your way around without it, and it does lend itself to the atmosphere. Also, not displaying the health does clear up the screen, which helps immersion, but it is difficult to defend it being a limited resource. For what it's worth, not knowing your health does add some element of tension, but that is what I like to call a Pyrrhic victory. No, I think the real problem lies elsewhere. Then you hear that scream from before and a bunch of red stuff starts chasing you up the screen. If you were wondering whether or not it's an instant kill, it is. So the second time around, I don't suck nearly as much, but as you can see, platforming is a major part of this game. Fortunately, the controls aren't bad, and it does feel like your fault when you screw up. If you survive the Familiar's crazy Kool-Aid climb, you'll be treated to a new area. Oh yeah, that thing's called the Familiar, by the way, another thing you'll only learn at the end of the game. There's nothing to the left but a bunch of whispering voices, so we'd better go right. Obviously, it's some kind of graveyard. So, we go in here and we're immediately dropped into a huge room. There's narrow platforms, these spinning blades keep spawning underneath you, and there's things crawling everywhere. There's spikes on the floor, and you'd better hope you went to the left first and ended up hitting this switch, because if you went much deeper without it, you're in for a world of confusion. Oh yeah, and see this easy to miss switch I can't press? Who knows why I can't press it, but you'd better remember it. And after that platforming, we come in here and learn that this area is called the Honored Refuse. And given that it's filled with coffins, I'm sure you can guess who's the refuse. So the game's a little cryptic, sure, but that's not the real reason the game's rated so poorly. It's because it's hard. Once you reach this area, all of the pieces start coming together. The game's cryptic, and it's hard. The game's confusing, and it's hard. It's got no map, and it's hard. See the pattern? All of these things on their own would have been manageable, but combine that with a high difficulty and we finally get the whole picture. Individually, the encounters in this game aren't that difficult, but you're eventually going to take damage, and it'll whittle you down room by room by room, and then you'll die without ever finding out what's at the end. And then you'll just sit in the save room and realize you need to do it all over again. So yeah, mystery solved. Anyway, after wandering around, we come to this passageway that looks suspiciously like an exit. But the flies are all red, and there's this weird noise too. Sure enough, try to walk past the grave and we're immediately put down to 1 HP. So that's not it. What we really want to do is go down this tube filled with coffins, avoid the infinitely spawning enemies, and make it all the way to here without taking too much damage. This glowing totem is the answer, and when we touch it, the screen goes all weird, and suddenly we're a weird frog tadpole thing being attacked endlessly by flying fetus things. The game calls this the Echo Realm. And when you're like this, you can't attack, only jump around and try not to die. If you manage not to die, you'll come up somewhere familiar. You're presented with 2 ways to go, and hopefully you'll choose left first. Now we're back in the first room, except it's even harder to see and we can't attack. If you've remembered that switch, good job, because we can only press it when we're in this form. Now we need to do a blind jump. The lack of vision makes this a little tough. We make it the second time, though. Now we go to the right and up here. So we drop through this thing that changes us back, and the game drops us off right in the area before that invisible thing over the grave. Might seem like the game's trying to tell you to go that way, but don't. What you really opened up was somewhere else, and more importantly, go save, because if you die now, you'll need to do that whole thing over again. So now we can go this way, crawl under all this crap, and finally kill this big thing at the top so we can get back into the Echo Realm. This will allow us to go to that grave while being inside the Echo Realm. It's full of eyes, and now we can see just what it was that was blocking our way. It'll still kill us, but fortunately the Echo Realm allows us to go underneath it. And that's that area. We're awarded with another save room. And then there's this area. It's got a fountain and some statues. It was probably nice once. We see a dead person who is suspiciously not malformed, and we learn that this place is called the Stuland Manor. A new place for us to roam around and get lost in. There's a conundrum on our hands. There's about 1 million reasons for me to hate this game, but I don't, so this is gonna take some examination. One question is, what does it mean to be good? Well, if you look it up on Google, you'll get about 1 billion definitions, but we're going to be focusing on the first. Something inherently desirable or agreeable. In the context of video games, I would make it something entertaining or engaging. Now, what constitutes good is a broad topic which would fall under the purview of your conundrums of axiology, which is beyond the scope of this video. But I don't think I'm going to start any fires when I say that good is a subjective term. What one finds entertaining, another might find frustrating. If you look at any rating aggregation site, be it Steam, Rate Your Music, or My Anime List, you will invariably come across people who don't like what you like. Believe it or not, there's even people who don't like my videos. Even your favorite album will have its detractors. Lower life forms they may be, the point still stands. There isn't anything universally agreed upon as good. A rating is really just a Gaussian distribution, or the chance that you'll be in the group that thinks it's good. However, even though 97% of people on Steam think Factorio is good, that doesn't mean 97% of humanity would share this opinion, even though they should. What it really means is that of the people already predisposed to purchase Factorio, of those who bothered to review it, 97% think it's worth recommending. It's a form of sampling bias. Everything is biased, and while it does point towards the game being good, it's still inherently biased. So, if reviews are biased, we can look at sales, but Wii Sports is the 4th best-selling game of all time, and I don't think many people are going to argue that it's the 4th best game of all time. While total sales and aggregate scores are excellent at pointing you towards things that are generally found good by other people, they are by no means a guarantee for you, or even in general. You know, I don't even know why I bothered saying all that when I could have just shown you this. According to popularity and ratings, this game is superior to Marrow. This. Oh, I guess when people say a picture is worth 1,000 words, this is what they mean. Ultimately, though, good is still subjective. Anyway, we're going through this area, get jump scared by this guy, and ultimately die to a drip in the ceiling, so now I need to do it again. We practice our ABJ on this faceless jumping swordfoot thing, rescue the crusty skull from the swarm of weird skullflies, and avoid dying to the giant instant kill monster. You know, normal stuff. Then we meet this guy again, and we're back. Over here, we grab what looks like a clarity upgrade, but it's actually our first magic spell. There's also this thing stuck to the ceiling, clearly not having a good time. Something interesting I noticed is that the sounds it makes are the same as the ones you'll hear above this pool of marrow in the Honored Refuse. Just something interesting. I do think this game has some very cool monster designs. Anyway, with the flame burst, now we can light these torches, and also destroy these yellow walls, which the game successfully clues you in on. It's used mostly for solving a variety of puzzles, but you can also use it against enemies, though stabbing them is usually better. Now we're exploring the upstairs, and here we come across that guy again staring out a window. Thanks to my keen gamer instincts, I find this area. In this game, you're going to want every upgrade you can find. In here, we find more of those faceless things, and as you can see, ABJ is so powerful, even the enemies use it. I'm sure these chalkboards are interesting for lore reasons, but I've got other things to worry about. Another quirk of this game is that some enemies can look the same but have wildly different behaviors. These guys are about a medium level of bounce, while this guy goes absolutely mental. I hate this guy, I really do. I mean it, I hate him! Anyway, your reward for defeating the boss is the ability to light this fireplace, which damages you, because of course it does. But it also lets us go in here. And do our eyes deceive? Yes, it is, it's a weapon upgrade. This rapier has twice the damage and twice the range as our old dagger. Although it seems something is less than happy about that, because the house is trying to stab us. Remember to save, and I totally did this on my first try. It's not like I died to that jumping guy 3 times. In here we've got this fancy bedroom and another fireplace to light, which, guess what, does damage. There's also this skeleton in the bed, and when you try to leave, there's a ton of enemies that spawned in your path. Fortunately, the upgraded sword makes this a lot easier. Around the top of the manor, you find a mirror, and you just stare at it for a bit. You stab it, and then try some other stuff, and then you realize that the answer actually was stabbing it, just in the right place. Leads you in here to this weird, psychedelic mirror realm. I don't like how it looks in here. But now it's time for me to introduce another quirk of this game. Remember when I said that 2 enemies can look the same but have different behaviors? Well, they can also have different amounts of health, too. This one takes 3 hits to kill, while this other one took 5. Yep, you heard right. It's an interesting design choice to be sure, but I can see the logic behind wanting to fake you out in a horror game like that, because most things have predictable amounts of health, but you never really know. Anyway, I've been talking too long with this place as the backdrop. We get to the top and find an upgrade for our amulet, which makes everything brighter, and thank God for that. Now we can see the whole screen, albeit faintly. Also, there's an orphan over here, but I'm getting out of this place. After upgrading our amulet and weapon, there's one more upgrade left to get here. After lighting all the fireplaces, we can get this earring, which reduces the amount of damage we take. Highly recommended. And yes, it does show up on our model. Welcome to the first boss of Marrow. Sorry, I mean second boss. This is probably the only thing that actually startled me. The way it just pops in immediately, it's just great. This is the Patriarch, and the blades he summons might look familiar. I also have on good authority that the skeleton in that bed is supposed to be him, which means this is his discarnate spirit or something. He has 3 attacks: summoning blades, making rocks fall from the ceiling, and shooting some glowing, bouncing orb out of his forehead. Visually, the boss looks great, but this is where it gets a little stinky. The screen is too dark to see the rocks falling from the ceiling before they hit you, and there's no warning when the orb is going to shoot out and beam you in the face. Combine that with the fact that you need to be jumping to hit him, which makes it difficult to dodge, and you have a boss that's about 50% skill and 50% luck. So inevitably, you're going to die. But the save point's right there, so you don't really have an excuse to give up. All that said, the boss isn't actually that hard. You just gotta hit him in the forehead 50 times. After you hit him 25 times, you get a second phase, which is basically the same except all the attacks are faster. And then he dies. I highly recommend going to the left and saving before going right. We meet this guy again, and he tells us to go over here. Now we're in the reservoir. But the reservoir of what? Well, Marrow. That's probably about time I explained it. According to the lore, Marrow is what happens when the universe bleeds. Basically, it's a substance created by tearing reality and has strange mutagenic properties, which explains the reservoir, the labs inside the manor, the overfilled graveyard, and all the weird monsters running about. There's clearly some thought put into the world. It's trying to tell a story in a hands-off approach, which I appreciate. Its visual style is the best thing it has going for it, and there is a method to its madness, but would have benefited from some more upfront clues. Most of what I just said were only things I figured out after playing through the entire game, and if you don't read the store page, you'd have no idea what's going on. Though, at the end of the day, the setting is what kept me going. Over here we have a very important item called the Luminous Orb. We're going to need this to solve several puzzles. And the game congratulates you for finding such an important item by shooting you in the face. Anyway, if we hold C and press directions, we can change the color of the orb. And if we match the colors correctly, we can reflect this thing's projectiles. Remembering which direction which color goes to is a bit of a pain. The fly over there seems to resonate with our color and produce a sound. I'm sure it's important for lore reasons, but more importantly, it's for puzzle reasons. After we kill that thing, a passage opens up, which allows us to get back into the manor. And that's pretty useful, because there's this psychedelic bathroom over here. Walking in any further hurts us, but if we listen to the sounds and replicate them with our orb, this happens. Once again, our reward is getting attacked. Anyway, deal with that, and we've found another orphan. Now I might as well take this time to use these warp gates and unlock some of the areas that were inaccessible before. Like this area here, that had a previously impassable chasm, but if you notice the blinking light in the background, you might remember to come back here once you get the orb. Once again, there's another orphan. Over here's an area that we needed the flame burst to get through. There's some platforming in the Echo Realm, and guess what's at the top? It's another orphan. This time though, we gain a spell called Grit Regain. It allows us to use our magic to heal ourselves, and while I'm not complaining, it means our magic pool is now essentially our health pool. So from a gameplay standpoint, that means that using magic to hurl fireballs essentially deals us 1 damage. So guess what we won't be using outside of puzzles? Here's some invisible enemies that you can only see if you tap the orb. This game is full of surprises. Oh yeah, I forgot. There's also a backdash move, but it's literally only useful for damage boosting through enemies. So previously we talked about how good is subjective, and while that is true, that doesn't mean that every person has their own wildly unique idea of good. We're all human, I assume, so broadly speaking, our brains all work the same. Generally, you'll see people self-segregating around genres, so you'll have something like the guy who prefers role-playing games, the guy who prefers first-person shooters, or the guy at work who will bring up Skyrim, then look confused if you bring up Oblivion. To the individual, the concept of good often becomes a question of which of those clusters the game falls under. This is perhaps a little reductive, but not unreasonable, I don't think, and an individual can overlap with several clusters. As for Marrow, its cluster is apparently weirdos like me, which is an admittedly small market. Having said that, I'd also like to touch on the topic of what you could consider objectively good, things that are good regardless of personal tastes. I suppose the most foundational example would be something that does not cause pain, so the Crazy Bus theme is out. In the context of this game, something objectively good would be that it plays a sound cue when you hit a switch to let you know a passage opened up. Graphical fidelity is probably also objectively good, but that breaks into a whole topic of cost-benefit optimization I'm not ready to go into, since anyone can think of a way to improve something given infinite resources. All I'm really trying to say is that there are things that supersede taste, and while it may be subjective, it often clusters together in very tangible ways. Hopefully by now you've mastered your ABJ, because there's monsters that require it. The whole point of the reservoir is to fall down this tube and find this place where we can go back into the Echo Realm. After some more annoying blind platforming, we can go in here and hit this switch, which lets us save this orphan. You didn't know how hard this one was to get because you didn't get to experience the terrible layout of this place. The most obvious path is directly underneath where you first come into the reservoir, but it is completely pointless unless you're in the Echo Realm after coming in way from the right. Not only that, but down here contains the only save point in the entire area, which tricks you into thinking you're in the right place, but it actually makes it harder to get where you need to go. Let me just restate this. The only save point in the entire area is actively worse than the save point at the previous area. And if that weren't bad enough, it's immediately guarded by these things that respawn every time you save. So now that I actually want to leave this area, I need to backtrack to the save point in the manor. And let me tell you, getting out of this place is not easy. But eventually, we do it. We also get to see these weirdos again. And another dead normal person. I'm sure there's no connection whatsoever. Even that guy shows up. It's a party. Welcome to Necropolis. If you've made it this far, congratulations, because it only gets worse. Down here is this thing, and it looks important, but it's not immediately obvious why. Then you attack this swarm of skullflies and find this guy being all, go over there, ooh. So you're like, okay. So then you jump on this dude's head and immediately get knocked off by an infinitely spawning swarm of flies. Then if you're anything like me, while you're getting attacked, you'll accidentally hit the switch and realize that it made them stop spawning. Now we try again and then realize it doesn't last long enough. At this point you might be like, oh, I saw an alternate path, so I'll go there instead. Up here, you'll find this waterfall of Marrow, which kills you when you touch it. And guess where we last saved? Yep, back at the manor. This is around when you realize the game is getting very stingy with its save points. And we're back. Turns out there's a closer switch up here, so we'll use that instead. There's switches along the way, so once you get going, it's no problem keeping the flies off. And there's the end. A whole 24 hours later, and I'm feeling a little more up to it. I'm not letting that happen again. Seriously, I'd expect that crap from Mario Maker, not this. We go through here, killing 3 of these frickin' things. Run all the way down here, and into this area full of infinitely spawning enemies. And when I say infinitely spawning enemies, I mean it. Without ABJ, we'd never make any progress. At this point, you might be wondering, where's the save point? It's been 10 minutes. Well, we're in luck. It's right over here, past another floor of infinitely spawning enemies. I know I have enough health, so I just start damage boosting through them. By now, these save points will have started to occupy the same space in your brain as the loving embrace of a significant other. Actually, that sounds way too positive. It's more like having one of those nightmares where you're drowning and then suddenly waking up. See those things? Well, you can stand on them. At no point does the game clue you in on this, you're just kind of expected to figure it out for yourself. And that is an example of objectively bad game design. Here's something funny. You can go down here and backdash through this pool of marrow to get to the next area. Before the Marrow speedrunning scene takes off, I'd like to call this one Catch-Up Skip. Here's an elevator, but it only works if one of the switches is currently active. Now the game doesn't tell you this, so if you happen to come across this while it's off, you'll just assume it's something you unlock later. Over here there's a big pool of marrow being fed from the sky, and this is the main puzzle of the area. You need to go around and explore to find rooms like this. Inside of them is one of these, and you can see the marrow pouring out of them. It spawns a bunch of flies, and you need to kill them all to make it vulnerable. Yeah, guess what? If you're a little too eager and keep attacking it after it's gone invulnerable, it'll damage you. Always with the surprises, this game. Failing that means we need to get to the area all over again, but this just so happens to be one of the most annoying areas in the entire game. You've got these laser beams firing off at random heights, then these things come down to attack you as crap falls on your head. The two previously took 3 hits to kill, but this one takes 7. All while on tiny platforms. I could literally spend about 10 minutes complaining about this screen alone. Now we gotta kill the wizard by jankily reflecting his orbs while lasers come from the sky. If all goes well, we're allowed to try again. So I'm not screwing around this time. This is the best example of how we can use jumps to attack way faster. And finally, it's dead. And the marrow stops flowing from its mouth. And now this previously filled area is empty. But we're not going there yet, we still got a lot to do. Back on topic, if our definition of good varies, how does one determine it? Well, it's largely predetermined. Without getting into affective neuroscience theories, it shouldn't be too shocking to hear that most people aren't applying strict epistemological methods when they're trying to see if they're having fun or not. They just play the game and either they like it or they don't. Obviously there's some granularity in between those two extremes, but the point still stands. Now we must ask, why do we like video games in the first place? I believe that at the most basic level we can attribute it physiologically to the concept of play. In a species, play is the behavior most closely associated with intelligence. The leading theory is that play stimulates the brain and allows it to create neural pathways in a risk-free environment that may contribute to survival later on. As such, the brain encourages play-like behaviors by releasing the appropriate reward chemicals. Accordingly, video games can be viewed as an advanced form of play. But seeing as we're a little more complicated than cats, they can also fulfill psychological needs such as self-actualization, the need for competition and dominance, as well as problem-solving. In essence, we've hijacked the reward pathways that were originally intended to help our survival. Personally, I wouldn't have it any other way. Oh yeah, this place sucks. Instead of going right, this time we go left, and then this thing spawns behind us. It seems to be totally invincible as it slowly advances towards us. No, that wasn't a jump cut, it just teleported me here. If you happen to find that guy and ran away without giving it a second thought, I pity you, because there's an orphan in here, and touching him is the only way to get here. And we're back in Necropolis. Here's some invisible platforms that you need to play your orb to reveal, but they barely last long enough, so this is bound to happen. If you go up here, you'll find that we're actually behind that waterfall of marrow now. Unfortunately, I die because this guy's face comes off. So I'm back. And a little further in, we find another one of these guys shooting energy orbs in front of a locked door. Which means there's probably another one of those mini-bosses through these doors. Unfortunately, this guy isn't nearly as easy as the other one because he spawns in all these crazy locations. You have very little time to react. And you're already low on health from the journey getting here, so you're probably going to die. Now we get to do it all again. That only took 5 minutes. This is made even harder by the fact that when you click to attack, there's a slight delay before your weapon becomes active. Then if you get hit, chances are it's gonna rebound and hit you again. I don't know why it was necessary to make him spawn in such awkward locations. This guy is an absolute menace. This time I managed to make it up here with 19 hit points and kill the guy, but there's still the mini-boss. It's just like the other one, except the arena is much harder. The problem is, if you were forced to run away, by the time you make it back to the center, its weak point will have already disappeared and deal damage to you. Okay, let's just skip to the part where it dies. But it's not over yet, I still need to save, and it took me 5 minutes to get here from the last save point. Instead of going back, I decide to forge ahead, assuming that there must be a save point up here. After going through some of the worst platforming the game can throw at me, I finally find one. You cannot imagine my relief. Now the question becomes, what the hell did we accomplish? Well, I'll tell you. Pretty much nothing. That's right, 2 mini-bosses down, and we've accomplished almost nothing. So screw this area, I'm going across that pool we drained. And then the second boss appears. If you try to attack him, you will die. And there's that skull from way back in the manor. So, how do we kill it? Well, we need to protect the crusty skull from the flies. If we do that, the crusty skull will then break the shield and reveal a weak point. But not for long, and you need to be jumping in a very specific way to actually hit it. And make sure you get out of the way before the shield comes back up. All things considered, this is probably the easiest boss in the game. And now we go in here. To get in, we need to hit this thing, which is apparently a harp. Welcome to the laboratories. If you thought it was gonna be any better than Necropolis, you're wrong. It's just as confusing and just as sprawling. There's also this wall over here. This area almost made me uninstall the game. So what makes this area so rough? Well, it's just as big and sprawling as Necropolis, except it's even darker and there's even less save points. It's even got its own mini-bosses. I don't even know what that switch does. This whole place is just confusing. I'd feel better about it if I wasn't currently killing a mini-boss in the new area while still being tied to the save point in Necropolis. The puzzle that almost got me to give up on the game was this one. You find these harps that give off a color when you hit them. There's 4 of them in total, and they're all numbered by the number of flies around them. It's obvious in retrospect, but when I played, after needing to hit a harp to open the first door, I assumed that hitting these harps would open another door, and the 1 through 4 was the order that I needed to hit them in. But that's not it. They're just the order of the notes you're supposed to play in front of this door. But the problem is, there's nothing to differentiate this door as being opened by the orb versus one that's opened by a switch. So when hitting the harps in order failed, I assumed the switch was deeper in, because there's plenty of areas I hadn't explored yet. But the reason I hadn't explored them yet is because they're pitch black and the enemies are literally invisible. And then I went through those areas and I died multiple times fighting dozens of invisible enemies, looking for the switch that opened the door I was already supposed to have opened before going there. Yeah, maybe it's my fault, but you need to remember that this game is so obscure, when I played it there were 0 resources online. If I was stuck, I had to get myself unstuck. And when you're lost and confused, fighting through the game's difficulty to search every corner of the map multiple times in hopes you find the solution, it's a grueling experience. But honestly, this is what games used to be like, obscure, and we didn't have resources then either. This game made me weirdly nostalgic for the days of playing DOS titles on my old Windows 95 home computer. You know, that enemy coming out of nowhere to hit you from the ceiling really encapsulates the feel of this game. After running through a load more crap, I'll end up at another one of these. Except this one's got infinitely spawning enemies coming after you. And times like this will make you abundantly aware of how easy it is to get stun-locked in this game, because taking damage cancels your attack animation. Next time around I come in from the middle, but they're still annoying. And it's dead. Now we get to platform over here. Down here there's those 2 guys we've seen before and some more of those blinky purple lights. The switch does this to them, and honestly I hate them. I hate looking at them, and I hate using them, but they do this. And we've activated them all across the world. With these activated, we can go to an earlier area and find this thing. Except we can't get in, our weapon's not strong enough. At least I can do this. In order to find a weapon strong enough, we need to go down here. Inside is the decrepit gold sword. Even though I've been to this area before, I didn't grab it because it actually will break if you use it too much. And if you save after breaking it, it's never coming back. To repair it, we need to bring it to the area above where we fought that mini-boss. At least the game gives you some hint about this, because it flashes this pillar when you first pick it up. And now our weapon does 3 damage instead of 2. Here's the other earring. Hopefully it'll help us die less. With the sword, earring, and orphan, we're ready to move on. Surprisingly, the next area actually has a save point before it. There isn't too much to say about this place. You light these braziers to make the missing platforms appear and to help keep you out of the soup. There's also these homing, infinitely spawning ghosts that phase in and out of existence. It's best to just ignore them. Also, these Metroid-looking things are back. If you go all the way to the right, you'll find this boat hanging over a big pool of marrow. Unsurprisingly, if you jump in, you die. After exploring a bit, you'll eventually come across a big room with a chain in the middle, and when you attack it, this guy spawns. We've seen this enemy before, so we know that all we need to do is reflect his projectiles back at him. Except that doesn't work at all. You can reflect it as many times as you want, but nothing will happen. Oh, his body will flash red every time you reflect a projectile properly, but he will never, ever die. Try as many times as you want, you will not kill him. So obviously there's gotta be some solution. But what? Well, you really wanna know? You break these mirrors with fireballs. You can also do it by reflecting an orb. And here's the problem with that. Previously, the game taught you that the way to kill them was by reflecting their orb into them. But now it's not. Accidentally reflecting an orb and hitting the wall is a complete fluke. In fact, the better you are at the game, the less likely you are to solve it. If there was some visual feedback that it's invincible, that would be fine, but it flashes red just like all the other ones you killed in the exact same way. Only a little mad. Anyway, that lowered the boat. But there's one more thing to do here, and that's to hit this thing. It starts a timer, and this thing shows up. He chases you everywhere. All the way up to where you need to be. Here's the solution. You need to drop down in front of this thing while the timer is active. There's no indication of that, and the only hint is flashing that circle when you hit the switch. Whatever, +1 orphan. At least for all our effort, we get to enjoy a nice and relaxing boat ride. Except it's not relaxing at all. It's actually the 3rd boss. This thing, called the Cloven, continually dives under the marrow while spikes spawn underneath you. It also shoots orbs at you. You can reflect the blue ones with your weapon, but on top of the animation delay, it's almost impossible to react in time. You're better off ducking. If you get too close so you can hit it with your weapon, it'll spew eggs at you. There's not really a good winning strategy. Just attacking blindly and tanking all the damage is about as effective as actually trying. Shockingly, there's a save point after the boss. Now we get to go over here. There's another one of these idiots attacking us. Hitting this harp makes the fly go away. I'm sure it'll be useful later. I don't know what's going on in this room, but this dead guy was kind enough to leave us a grid upgrade. How nice. The main purpose of this area is to find this thing. Seems the weird skull flies are at it again. Whatever it is, it disappears. So you wander around and explore some more, and then suddenly that happens. Thanks to that, we can get in here now. But it's kind of gross. Welcome to Malignance. Basically, it's Cancerland. If you touch one of these purple orbs, the screen does this, and these things start chasing you. They're completely invincible, and I would not recommend touching them. Luckily, if you leave the screen and come back, it goes back to normal. There's not many enemies in here. It's mostly just cancer. It may look bad, but this is one of the easier areas in the game. Up here we find some colored flies floating around. Thanks to them, we have the code to get rid of all these weird polyp things, and get the fourth and final amulet upgrade. Then you get some whispering voices, a picture of a house, and then these 4 skeleton things over here. I'm sure there's some deep lore going on here, but I don't have the time. The only other point of interest is over here. There's a save point right here, and a warp door right next to it, which is very convenient for backtracking. But the question remains, what the heck is this place for? Well, I'll tell you. I hope you remember every place you heard whispering voices, because that's where we need to go. First stop's here, all the way back in Honored Refuse. Feels like this place was an eternity ago. You might even remember this room. The wall on the left is now slightly fuzzy, and if we try, we can crawl into it, leading us here into this place. This thing is only vulnerable to magic damage and is constantly spawning enemies. It just sits up there until it chooses one of 3 locations to appear at, and I'd say about 90% of the time that's right on top of you. I hope you've found plenty of clarity upgrades, cause this thing takes like 20 fireballs to kill. Eventually you will kill it though, and you're rewarded with one of the Seer's eyes. The next one's back here, in a place you're guaranteed to never look. At least this one's in normal vision. Last one is all the way in Necropolis. Remember way back when I was complaining about how killing those Marrow-spewing mini-bosses did nothing useful? Well, here it is. It lets us access this. This arena is the worst. You are not allowed to stand anywhere where the thing won't appear on top of you. Well, we kill it and get another eye. Yep, that's right, the Seer has 3 eyes. With all that, we can go back to the hut. Yep, it's the 4th boss. Attacking the Seer directly damages you, because of course it does. Not only is the Seer summoning an endless flood of blood enemies, but ghosts are coming in from the right too. The only way to damage the Seer is to reflect its projectiles back with your orb, but good luck being able to pull your orb out because the constantly spawning enemies will never leave you alone. Since the ghosts are constantly fading in and out, you can never kill them when it's convenient either. And God help you if you fall off those platforms and end up down here, because you will immediately be stun-locked to death. And when you do actually get a few seconds to yourself to reflect an attack, you better remember the color and react immediately. If that wasn't bad enough, sometimes it'll randomly shoot a projectile you can't even reflect with your orb. And there is no timing or tell to when it's about to launch an attack you can actually reflect. You can just sit there for 30 seconds doing nothing while you just get annihilated by the endless stream of enemies. So yeah, you're gonna die. Multiple times. I mean it. But eventually, by what mostly feels like a fluke, you will kill the Seer. And it drops about the only thing that could make it feel like any of this was worth the effort. The 4th and final sword upgrade. With it, we can break this wall and rescue the second to last orphan. Now you might be getting the impression that I hate this game. And yeah, I guess I kind of do, but not that much. It's complicated. If you've been keeping up with the overarching discussion of this video, you may have realized that I'm not a very good video essayist, or whatever the kids are calling it these days. I'm not telling you what to think, or taking any hard stances, and all I've really managed to say in too many words is that people have different opinions and to throw up my figurative hands because the concept of good is too complicated. The gulf between our psyches is much too vast to work towards anything truly objective, but truth be told, if all you're looking for is a good game, you can do a lot worse than listening to the Vox Populi. It's extremely rare that you'll like a game that a significant amount does not. And so, now that I've established that, it begs the question, why do I like this game? Well, if you've made it this far, I'm sure you can wait a little longer for the answer. The final area is actually down here. Technically, we didn't need to do any of that stuff to beat the game. Despite being the final area, it's actually the easiest. There's an orphan to rescue, but that's about it. Everything else is just health upgrades and empty rooms filled with nothing but lore. That sound means that we've rescued all the orphans. Seeing all this environmental storytelling around makes me wish that someone else would play it so they can explain it to me. But I'm sure there's something about experiments, these things are related to the seer we just killed, and this thing, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be where the familiar came from. Then the familiar is like a, earthly incarnation of some all-devouring outer god, whose incarnation was, sealed away for the good of all mankind and buried underneath the mountain along with all the research. That's about all I've got. I could speculate, but this video is long enough as is. Anyway, at the bottom of the tower, we seem to have wandered into an alternate dimension, or at the very least, somewhere off Earth. I'm glad there's save points in alternate dimensions. Keep walking and you'll see these guys. Clearly they wanted us to be here. And clearly they want us to go down here. They lead us to a boss called Olnok's Eyes. It's completely stationary, and the only way to damage it is to wait for these platforms to rise and hit it in the eyes. These eyes will shoot out projectiles, but you can block them with the right color of your orb. That is, unless the platform rises underneath you and pushes it through your shield. Then you'll get hit by one of those random streaks of lightning, but then the boss itself will shoot a projectile, so you just jump over it. But then with no visual distinction, it shoots a second kind of projectile that you can't jump over. And then you get knocked off your platform and need to wait for another cycle to actually deal damage. And it reflects damage too. It's a lot of random, unreadable attacks, and I could not imagine ever killing this boss without taking damage. But once you manage to take out its eyes, its core becomes exposed. At this point you will have mastered your ABJ, and that's good because precise strafing is the only way you're going to be able to hit it multiple times. But you need to be patient or that'll happen, and it does 4 damage. After some effort, we kill it, but notice how I didn't say it was the final boss? I suppose this is the dimensional wound where the Marrow's supposed to come from. At the end of it, you'll find this hole. Welcome, and no, your eyes are not deceiving you. The final boss is actually invisible. It is so hard to avoid getting hit by these things. You have this ball bouncing around randomly in ways that are impossible to avoid, and these things will never stop until you kill them. And it just keeps summoning more. Then there's this attack where you're forced to run away and collide with another projectile. Dying is an inevitability. And when you die, you're going all the way back. Your main goal of this fight is not to defeat him, but to defeat him without losing too much health. Something easier said than done. You better hope you've almost found all of the grit and clarity upgrades, cause you're going to need them. Supposedly, you can beat this game without ever upgrading your weapon from the clumsy dagger, but I do not buy it. This time we've got 39 HP to spare. If you actually manage to hit him, you'll get to see him for a fraction of a second. And just because he's invisible doesn't mean he doesn't have contact damage. Oh yeah, and these projectiles scramble your screen, how could I forget? This boss fight is honestly exhilarating, but for all the wrong reasons. Everything's going crazy, the music's blaring at you, stuff's flying everywhere, and you can only hope that you blindly manage to hit him. And all of this on a limited pool of health you can't even see. Genuinely, I cannot imagine, I cannot fathom beating this game without the Tendril Sword and all of the upgrades. Even with this much HP, you'd better hope you get lucky. Your adrenaline's pumping, your heart's loud in your ears, but eventually you will kill it. That's not the end. Oh no, the game's got one final thing in store for you. Recognize the red stuff? Yep, it's an instant kill chase sequence. And if you die, you're doing all of that again. The precision platforming will make you clench yourself into a black hole. Then you're like, what the hell is this thing? But you don't have any time to worry about it, you just need to go. You end up where it all started, and then the Marrow starts rising and I had a heart attack because I thought I did something wrong and I just died. But yep, that's the ending. Your amulet floats up from the Marrow, and then the music starts playing. After this, you get the old monster roll call. Now, why do I like Marrow? The first possibility that you might consider is that I simply enjoy pain. But you can't enjoy pain, it's a semantic contradiction. Now I know you're all fans of the 20th century behavioral psychologist Theodore Rake, but bear with me for the few who aren't. He posits that masochism is an attempt to elude anxiety and to gain self-esteem by demonstrating some form of mastery over pain, so it's not the pain itself that masochists are after. Others posit that masochism is a means of escaping from a high level of self-awareness, and honestly, video games tick both those boxes. You challenge yourself to prove to yourself that you can overcome that challenge, and you play video games to forget how much reality sucks. So yeah, if you think I was gonna let a janky indie title no one's ever heard of think it was better than me, you're dead wrong. But that's just why I didn't give up. More than that, I appreciate the novelty of it all. The visual style is the main appeal of the game, and it did its job of making me want to see more of it. For all its issues and numerous questionable design choices, as an individual work of interactive fiction, it succeeded in its ultimate goal, and despite all the people it lost, I can only congratulate it for that. Seeing all these non-standard design choices being made deliberately, you know that the creator made the game exactly the way he wanted it to be, and damn the consequences. There's an artistic purity in that, something made because it appeals to the creator, not to an audience. Again, I can only celebrate that. Perhaps it sounds like all the reasons I like Marrow are metaphysical ones, and while the gameplay was serviceable and reasonably engaging, I cannot deny that I personally heavily value those things, and were it not for the art direction, atmosphere, and some nebulous idea of artistic integrity, I wouldn't have played it, let alone beat it. So, do I like Marrow? It's hard to say, but I do love it in perhaps the most pragmatic, down-to-earth sense, because I didn't like it all the time, and for all its efforts to torture me and through all the highs and lows, I still love it. And to this day, I think of this obscure little indie game more often than I do most AAA titles I played last year. But ultimately, that's just my opinion, and it's probably worth only slightly more than yours. Anyway, at the end of it all, the amulet ends up at this beach here. If you made it this far, I'm impressed. Thanks for watching.